You were at the hearings with Mark Zuckerberg as well. What is your sort of biggest takeaway here? Did anything surprise you about what Sandberg or Dorsey had to say?
Well, I think what is super clear to me at this point is that the more that senators learn about these companies, the more they want to know, the more they realize that these are very complicated algorithms, these are hard to explain policies, and that the companies are really juggling a lot of different considerations here when they make decisions over what to leave up and what to take down. And although the claims of anti-conservative bias have been debunked, it speaks to this larger discomfort over the fact that there is not a lot of public transparency about how these companies operate.
Michael, look, you work with these companies, you represent these companies. You know, what do you think about how Sandberg and Dorsey performed in the hot seat? It certainly seems like lawmakers were better prepared, and they were better prepared as well.
They performed very well, and transparency is incredibly important for all the companies, and these two in particular, and coming up to Capitol Hill to educate policymakers and talk about the platforms and open up to any questions that policymakers have is important, and it helps educate them, and I think everybody ends up better off, and obviously a very long day for Jack Dorsey in particular.
Sarah, what do you make of the fact that Dorsey, and look, Twitter shares ended down more than 6% today. Dorsey was very contrite, almost too contrite. In fact, there was one moment where he talked about how the way that Twitter was designed 12 years ago, may just not be the way that they want Twitter to be today, and that fundamental changes are necessary to make here. Nobody sort of knows quite how to interpret that and what that means.
Well, Dorsey has said before that they're going to have to make some fundamental changes to how Twitter works, but it has a different weight when you say it under oath in front of Congress, and you're explaining that a lot of the incentives that your platform was built on, he mentioned the follower count, for example, that maybe that needs to be revisited. I mean, Twitter could completely shift its priorities to look towards a cleaner future for its users, and that could change what Twitter is. But at the same time, he mentioned how difficult that's going to be. He mentioned, for example, that it's difficult for Twitter to be able to know who is a bot versus who is a human. That was very concerning to me, because I'm thinking, if I'm an advertiser, I want Twitter to be able to tell me what people like and what they want to look for in terms of shopping. And if they don't even know if they're a human, how are they going to help me sell them ads?
Right. He talked about the difficulties of distinguishing where certain accounts are coming from. The companies talked about how they are working together. Michael, we have to talk about how Google did not show up. Lawmakers didn't miss an opportunity to talk about how they didn't like being snubbed. Take a listen to this from Marco Rubio on Google's no-show.
I want to thank you both for being here. First of all, there's an empty chair next to you from Google. They're not here today. And maybe it's because they're arrogant, or maybe it's because there's a report that, as of last night, this just posted at 3:36 yesterday, this group went on basically pretending to be Kremlin-linked trolls. They did everything. They used the details of the Internet Research Agency, which is a Kremlin-linked troll farm, and were able to buy ads online and place them on sites like CNN, CBS This Morning, HuffPost, Daily Beast. So I'm sure they don't want to be here to answer these questions.
Michael, you know how important it is for these tech companies to be well represented in Washington. Was this a big mistake? Eric Schmidt used to make these kind of appearances for Google, but Google, at this point doesn't really have someone who enjoys these kind of public interactions under the bright lights. Larry Page, the CEO of Alphabet, hasn't done a public interview in 3 years.
Look, I can't get into the negotiation between the committee and the company on who is going to come testify. Kent Walker has testified quite a few times, and I know had offered to come in and testify at this hearing. They speak in a number of different ways, and I know they did offer to testify. Maybe it was a missed opportunity, but that's between the committee and the company if they want to send somebody up or not.
Right, but Kent Walker, with all due respect, is not the CEO of Google, Sundar Pichai, not a founder of Google either. I mean, do you think that going forward, Google has the representation it needs in Washington as it deals with issues around trying to potentially re-enter China? The president taking aim at Google now over and over again for what he perceives as bias.
Look, there are so many different issues now that the companies are facing, and frankly, as you heard from the hearings today, they're taking a lot of proactive steps, and I give them a lot of credit for doing that, making changes and improvements to the platforms on their own. And as it relates to Google, they are very well represented both here in Washington and certainly have a number of experts back in Mountain View, and who they want to send up, that's between them and the committee.
Sarah, in terms of next steps, as the president continues to train his ire on Google, on Facebook, and on Twitter, these companies, as Michael said, are now facing a whole range of issues. Are they prepared to answer questions, not just from lawmakers, but from the administration?
I think that's going to be even tougher. Look, the DOJ came out with a statement right after the first hearings concluded, saying that they thought that maybe there was some stifling of American speech happening on these platforms. That's extremely concerning, because that's a little bit more, the hearings were very cordial. They were very measured in terms of the back and forth, and the company has done a lot of behind the scenes work, both companies have, to try to develop relationships with these lawmakers. Sandberg talked about her meetings with Mark Warner. We don't know if they have that kind of relationship with the administration or with the DOJ, and so that's going to be a completely new front for them to try to figure out how to deal with.
Michael, what do you think of this issue now that the Justice Department is taking a closer look at these companies? How much of a concern is that?
Look, it's it's their prerogative. They want to look into it. I think they'll find there is no censorship of political speech. It would be ironic if they want to censor speech because they said speech is being censored. Look, from the conservative point of view in particular, these platforms are open and transparent, and people are getting their voices heard. All of the policymakers that were at the hearings today are on social media every single day, both for their official accounts and campaigns. And I think it's very obvious and very clear to everybody that uses the platforms, they're open for all political parties and all viewpoints.
Sarah, I do want to ask you, the question of China came up over and over again, and it was interesting listening to Sheryl Sandberg's statements about China in particular. It sounded like lawmakers were trying to pin her down to say, no, we won't try to get back into China. Is that the way that you interpreted her response? She said, we wouldn't enter a country that didn't share our values.
And yet Facebook has attempted to enter China in other ways. They've launched apps here and there. They do have an office in Beijing that sells ads to people who want to export their products, and certainly people access Facebook still within the country via VPNs. So, they would love to be in China, let's be honest. The company there, though, is having some trouble dealing with this kind of line of questioning from the government here. The government a couple times tried to explain that they want the companies to say that they are in favor of U.S. superiority over all other countries in the world, but these are global companies, and they have to deal with governments in hundreds of countries, and so they can't just pledge allegiance to the United States without endangering their presence elsewhere.